Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter podcast is also proudly presented by the Crazy Elk Company. Based out of the state of Washington with products made in America, they are providing solutions with gear to problems you didn't even know you had. Their tag wallet is one of those solutions, and I had the pleasure of using it on all of my hunts this last year, and it is now a mainstay in my kill kit. The tag wallet is a water-resistant zippered pouch that comes with its own reusable zip ties to safely and securely store your notch tag for quick and easy access. For more information, go to crazyelkcompany.com and use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. Be blessed, everyone, and as always, stay soulful. This podcast is also proudly brought to you by OnX Hunt. When I first got into hunting, I kept hearing all about public land and different access and how to find different locations to hunt. I was like, well, how are people even identifying all this stuff? Well, sure enough, I came across the number one hunting GPS app, and that is OnX Hunt. If you guys want to get better at hunting and go deeper into your scouting, OnX Hunt is the number one GPS app for that. Join the millions of hunters who trust OnX Hunt to find more game, discover new access, and hunt smarter. It was a game changer for me, and I know it's going to be a game changer for you if you've never used it. If you have used it, you know the power that it holds. Guys, I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you want to know more about OnX, go to onxmaps.com/hunt and check out their app. Be blessed, freedom on, and stay soulful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and today I am joined by one of my, how do I say this, heroes in the hunting world, Beau Martonik from the East Meets West Hunt podcast. And Beau was one of the guys who, when I took to social media and I started to see what was going on in this world, he was a dude who really stood out to me. I remember when I started to launch this podcast, I'd go back and listen to Beau's first episode and early episodes and be like, okay, what is Beau doing these days? How is he, holding up? And he's been a guy who I've been trying to get on this podcast for the longest time, but he's kind of wily. He's a squirrely dude, man, trying to lock down a dude on the East Coast when you live on that West Coast timeline. Yeah. Beau, brother, thank you so much for joining me for an episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Yeah, it was funny. Like when you were on the West Coast, I was on the East Coast. You're like, can we do it at 8 p.m. my time? I was like, well, that's midnight here, so no, I cannot do that. It was always difficult.
Dude, it's so brutal. Well, now I'm living in Texas, so I got that central time. So I got a hand on each coast, and I'm living that East meets West right now as we're bringing it together for this podcast. I love it, dude. So how's your podcast going?
It's good, man. It's been going good. It's in, I guess, year 4 now. July 1st would have been year 4 of doing this. And I get asked a lot, like, are you gonna run out of topics? Like, or I'm like, I have a list so long, like, I just want to keep going. I love doing it, man.
Yeah, dude, you have a great podcast. I've listened to quite a few of your episodes. Do you listen to podcasts much? Being a host of a podcast, do you actually listen to podcasts much anymore?
Not as much as I used to. I was obsessed with it when I first started, like even before that. I don't listen to many anymore. It's difficult. I'm like, it's all I do is either record them or edit them and listening back to them. And I'm like, I just want some music sometimes,
Dude, I totally get it. I used to also, and I guess it's part of the way the world is, I'd commute, and so I'd listen to podcasts when I commute. But I don't commute anymore, and I work from home, and you quit the full-time work gig, and now you're working for yourself rather than sticking it to the man all the time. So it's probably the same thing. It's like you're just not in your car anymore.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I'm not in my car as much. Like I always had a thing where I'd listen to podcasts or audiobooks in the morning on the way to work and listen to music on the way home. Because at that point I didn't want to think about anything. I just wanted to, just kind of tune out. But that's been kind of my thing. And then now with, rolling out of bed right into the office, it's you don't have as much time for that.
I love it. Do you keep a pot of coffee in your office? We're just like refill, just hitting it.
No, I don't. I know I don't, because normally what I do is I get up and I'll go to the gym. Now I've started where I'll work a little bit and then go to the gym, in the early morning still. But I'll go down and I'll drink pre-workout before that. So I try not to add coffee to the mix because it would just make me wired.
Look at you. You're so savage. Living that fit life, bro. You're just bringing it. Bo, for all the listeners who are on the West Coast listening to this podcast and actually might not know who you are, which would shock me because, dude, you're Beau Martonik. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
But in all seriousness, Bo, can you give a little history on yourself, like how you ended up getting into the podcasting life and everything that you've gotten accomplished within like your outdoor riding and all that?
Yeah, so I'm from Pennsylvania, so I grew up out here hunting Appalachian mountain whitetails and just like into the deer and or deer and turkeys were my thing. Like just all the time, my whole family was into it. We have a very strong deer hunting culture, and like our deer camp is a place that my entire family goes to. So like growing up, I had no choice other than to hunt. Like that was just what I was bred to do basically. And so I just kind of carried that on. And it was about 2015, early 2016. I was like, I read Cameron Haynes's book Backcountry Bow Hunting, and it made me want to go out west. I thought it was only for people with a lot of money or whatever. I just never looked into it, trying to do it. And I was like, I need to plan an elk hunt. And I was like, I want to do it this year, like right now. And I looked at you could do over the counter options in Colorado. So I called my brother who's in the military at the time, like, can you get off this? And he's like, yeah, I'll go. And then my cousin, the same way, like I didn't have to pitch it to him that hard. They're just like, yeah, I'll go. And so from that point, when I went out in that hunt, I was just like hooked. Like that's all I wanted to do was just like go, and I didn't even kill anything. Like I got my ass kicked for 7 days out there, and just like I felt like it was what I needed to, sometimes you're like, oh, I can do this, or I can do that. Well, let's see it, and that kind of was that eye opener for me that I wanted to do better preparing physically, mentally, my gear, understanding the elk and their behaviors, and that just like had me hooked, and I wanted to learn more. And at that time, there was a bunch of podcasts, but they were more geared to somebody that already knew the Western hunting game. And I'm like, I'd love to be able to interview these people and make myself better selfishly from a learning standpoint, but also be able to help other people like I've learned from these podcasts that they can do it on their own too. So that's when I was like, I'm going to start this podcast, and I wrote an article right around that same time of that first elk hunt, and I submitted. I was not a writer at the time. I submitted it to an online publication called the Journal of Mountain Hunting, and they took one subscriber story a month and would post it. So I submitted it, and I was trying to come up with a name for it. My brother was like, "How about East meets West?" I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds pretty decent." So did that, and they ran that story, and that I shared it on social media, and I had so many like just friends and family and other people that were like, "Oh, I wish I could do that hunt, but I don't have the time or the money." And I was like, "Well, actually, it's not time's one thing, but like the money aspect wasn't what I thought it was if you plan it and do it yourself and everything." So that's what kind of led me to thinking about the podcast. And I remember sitting at the bar at ATA show because I worked for a bow shop at the time. So I was helping buy products for the year. And I was sitting there at the bar, and I was like, you know what? I was like, I want to do this podcast. I remember telling my boss from the bow shop that, and he's like, yeah, okay. Yeah.
He
I'm
really
like,
believed
yeah,
in you.
no, yeah, he did not. And so we were, and I joke with him about it to this day, but then it took me like a while, and I was like, I need to do this. And I was telling Rob from the Total Archery Challenge about it. And he's like, well, what if I gave you a booth and you could do podcasts there? Brian Call is going to be there, Jordan from Mountain Ops, all these people are going to be there in this one place. And you could record podcasts. And I was like, okay, well, when is it? And he's like, 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that. And I was like, holy cow. Like, so I got on Amazon, I ordered my podcast equipment. I learned how to use it while I was there, and I had a couple shirts and hats made when you could get them made in like a short amount of time
Yep.
at one point. And yeah, I just went all in on it, and I thank Rob for that because if he wouldn't have, gave me that kick, I don't know if I would have even went through with it. If I would have thought about it too hard, I might not have. So that was kind of the start of the podcast, was to be able to help people plan hunts in different places. And then also kind of showcase the big woods whitetail side of things on the East Coast that doesn't get much media attention because you're not typically looking at these big whitetail bucks. They're hard to hunt. They just live in the timber. There's no ag fields, nothing like that. So that became a big part of it. And honestly, it's probably one of the biggest parts of the podcast now, is the whitetail side of it. But yeah,
Nice.
that was a long way of explaining the story, but that's kind of how I started it.
Man, you're such a long-winded fella for having a podcast. Jeez, give me a break, bro. Come on. I love the story. Though also, you're like 250 episodes into your podcast. That's an accomplishment, because a lot of people, like, they're like, "Oh, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to do a podcast." And like a year later, they're like, "I think I'm done with the podcast."
Yeah. No, it was a grind. I mean, when I was working my full-time job and I had a part-time job at a bow shop and then was trying to do this on top of it, it was like I just wasn't. I remember I'd always release at midnight, and on that whatever week it was, I think it was a Tuesday night, and I'd like be up until like trying to get it uploaded at like 11:50. I was like determined that I wasn't going to miss a week and I was going to be right on time, as if anybody cared at that point. But it was just like that was my thing. I just kept going with that drive, and eventually it started taking off a little bit and doing well. And I just started taking courses on business and learning how to, you know, to pitch projects or pitch yourself in your podcast to companies to be able to, make money off of it. And yeah, so that kind of just went down that hole. And as of 3 months ago, this is now my full-time job. So it's been.
Heck yeah, dude. Congratulations. Hats off to you, man. That's big
No,
time.
thank you.
I got so we by the way, we're going to be covering a lot of topics on this podcast tonight, because there's a lot of different avenues in which you have experience in that I want to address for the listeners, because for a lot of reasons. We'll get to that. Congratulations. How stressful is it to be self-sustaining through your outdoor writing and podcasting and whatever else you're
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah,
Content creation.
it was really difficult to make that decision. Like, I knew from the beginning I wanted to, and I had people telling me just to go all in, and I just couldn't let go of the security of a salary and 4 weeks paid vacation and all of those things. It was difficult. And finally, I was talking to Mark Kenyon from Wired to Hunt, and I was like, "How did you know?" Like, and he's like, "Well, when things start, working out from the financial side and you believe in it, like he's like, you just got to set a date and go for it." And I don't know why, because so many people told me like similar things, and I was like, but that just like hit me that day, and I set a date for that. That was in September. It was like the following April that I was going to be done working at my full time job, and I worked towards it and went into the year, hot planning it, and gave my work a couple months notice. And yeah, as of the end of April there, I had to stay a couple extra weeks, but the end of April I was out and rolling with it. So
Dude,
it's
so
been it's been uh it's been weird at first. Like, not I've worked so long going to a place from 7 to 4 or whatever, like every day, to being on my own schedule and own time was like, it was almost added stress because I felt like I was should have been doing something different.
right.
But I've got over that now, and everything's been going great.
Dude, I'm kind of in the same boat right now, though, because I quit teaching after 16 years of being a public educator. I am officially done. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to do mortgages and I'm going to hammer that hard, but I also want to use this time to really grow Soulful Hunter, Washington Backcountry, Soul Seekers. And I know I have a lot of random names. Like, it seems like you're branded very random, but there's a reason for all that madness and it but I know what it's like. It's like, okay, you're looking at your clock, and I don't know about you, but I have a giant whiteboard across the office from me, and I'm staring at it. It's like, okay, here's my to-dos, here's what I need to accomplish. Mondays are for this, Tuesdays are for this. Are you having to
Yep.
dedicate your days and your weeks and be very specific?
Yeah, no, that's and I've kept that even after, leaving my other job. Was like I work well under schedules, and that's just what I'm used to. So I kind of just lay that out for myself, and it's been working well, that's for sure. But I don't get it. I thought I'd have like all this extra time, and somehow I keep myself just as busy as I was before. I get a little more sleep. I'll say that. So that was something I prioritized, is making sure I get a little more sleep.
There you go. Are you still releasing your podcast at midnight?
4 a.m. now is when they go out. I just been messing with the different times on what does better, but yeah, still 4 a.m. But I'm getting them done earlier that day beforehand because I'm not having to wait until after work to start editing.
I freaking love it. You're so savage. All right, so Bo, real quick, before we get into the hunting aspect of this, I want to talk a little bit about the business side of it. So many people have this idea of like, oh, I want to take like the hunting or hunting industry or social media influencer or whatever you want to call it and take that full time. It is a hard road to hoe. What would you say to people in regards to wanting to turn whatever content creation into a full-time job?
I would say whatever your goal is with it needs to be very strong, and you need to ask yourself like why you want to do it, because it's going to be a long road. And that's not to discourage anybody, because it's totally possible, but it's just being realistic. You need to know it's going to be a long road of working towards it to finally get to a point. And there's a lot of competition out there, and that's but if you have I feel like you have that strong why, that you will get there if you just stick with it. For me, I'm like, if I can just not quit and just keep working at it and have that in my mind, that I'll eventually get there. And I'm far from getting there, but the first step of being able to leave my job was definitely I felt good about
Yeah.
it.
Did Now you're 4 years into doing your podcast and you're just now able to leave your full-time job. There's a lot of people that like they do it because they're like, "Oh, I want the free gear. Oh, I want the free stuff." And I've seen so many people wash out because of that, because free stuff, regardless of how cool it is, doesn't last long enough. There's no intrinsic value. And I think that's
No.
really your why, right? It's like what you're talking about. It's like, well, why are
Yeah.
you actually doing it? For me, same as you, I started my podcast because I was like, dude, I don't know. I want to network. I want to learn. And so I started doing the podcast selfishly. I
Yeah.
want to meet people all over the place. And now I have a network, and same with you, where if you wanted to hunt in any state all over the place, I'm pretty sure you could find somebody or someone that would be
Yeah.
glad to partner up with you on what you're creating.
Oh yeah, and yeah, you're exactly right. And like, so my podcast had been 4 years, but I was doing like quote unquote content creation on Instagram and stuff for 4 years prior to that. Like it was a while to build that up and go with it. And I feel like another thing I will say to people is like, if you're looking to do that, have a niche, like have something that you're focused on, and don't just try to be, a hunting podcast or whatever. Like have your like set thing that you're kind of building everything around. And I'm just giving podcasts an example, but like stick to that. What makes you different? Because there's, million people that are similar in a lot of respects. So that
Yeah.
would be my advice. And just like I said, just keep with it. Don't try to go so hard at the beginning, and just steady, slow and steady.
Self-reflective questions are always the hardest. So
Yeah.
what sets you apart? What's your why? You know?
Yeah, so mine is being able to help people have a better experience with planning hunts and being able to do that is the one part. And then there's kind of the secondary aspect of it, which is like the Appalachian whitetail thing and showing that there's that just because you live in Pennsylvania and you don't have agriculture, that you can still have an adventure that makes you feel like you're out west or anything close to home. And it comes down to your perspective. And I think that that's what I want to give the tools for people to be able to be better in that. That's my why.
Freaking love it. Hey, how do you define adventure, by the way?
I used to ask that question at the end of every podcast, and I haven't done it in probably, I don't know, 150 episodes. It's been a long time, but I used to ask everybody that. So how oh, I haven't thought about this one in a minute. But I define adventure by kind of going to new places that are unknown to me, that are, have a level of risk and not even like, like a health risk or anything, but where the unknown, I guess, and being able to kind of embrace that and come out on the other side, like just better for it. And that's how I look at adventure, how
Dude,
I define adventure.
dude, look at you. Now, I don't I don't know how much feedback you ever get on your creation of content, but
Hmm.
I've always truly admired you and what you've done and what you've put out. And so here I am, like I'm pulling out your slogan from that you created back at the beginning of your podcast 4 years ago, and then you're like, "Oh man, that's."
Yeah.
it,
No, but man, it's hilarious because like I mean, probably newer people that listen to it wouldn't have really understood that or heard it because I used to always ask people that at the end of the episodes too.
well, it just
You
goes
remember
absolutely.
that?
Well, here it just goes to show what type of impact you're making in this world. What you're doing has a lasting legacy, and um, it's. I'd rather my podcast. I'd rather go deeper than wider, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people they'll just be like, "Ah, we're just gonna go wide and we'll see how it goes." But you obviously made a connection with me and it impacted me, and I'm like, okay, so here I am. I don't know, 3 years into my podcast, maybe 2.5. I don't even know. Honestly, I don't even know when my inception date was. But I've been like chasing you down as a guest ever since.
Yeah, and you've been on mine in the
Yes.
first year or so of it. Yeah, you were one of the guests on mine there too. So I remember you talking about the story of your elk hunt and everything.
Dude, it's a wild story. Brother, thank you for having me on, by the way. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Okay, so let's shift gears here for a second. Before we get into your Western hunting, we're going to talk about your Eastern hunting. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to put something on your horizon. I want to plant a seed into your brain because hearing you always talk about these mountain bucks of the Appalachians in Western or Central Pennsylvania and all this stuff, I'm like, okay, Beau's ready for it. So when I hear you and I see you talk and show content about hunting these mountain bucks, which I want you to explain here pretty soon. The seed I'm going to plant in your head right now is it sounds very similar to hunting blacktails. And blacktail deer are only on, the West Coast and west part of the Cascade Mountains in the state of Washington. And just so you know, you can get an over-the-counter blacktail tag, which, by the way, it's just a deer tag, so you could actually hunt whitetail or mule deer. But if you specifically wanted to come for blacktail, it is only a deer license only for out-of-state non-resident is $435. So you can put that on your horizon, and depending on what weapon you want to hunt, I can get you connected. There are some savage blacktail hunters out here, and you would love the challenge of it.
Interesting. No, I did not think you were going that way. I thought you were going to say Washington whitetails, and because that's been something, Washington, Montana, or Idaho, Montana, like that whole, Pacific Northwest up in there, trying to hunt some of those mountain whitetails. So I thought that's the route you were going to go.
Yeah.
I didn't. I've heard that about blacktails, but I have not had it explained that way, or been asked that I need to consider
Dude,
it.
they're the gray ghost. I mean, and here's the thing is like any blacktail is a trophy blacktail because they're that hard to hunt. Um,
Interesting.
yes, and obviously we're not talking about your lowland farm blacktail or pasture blacktail. I'm talking about the way you hunt your mountain whitetail. Like you can
Yeah,
go hunt these mountain blacktail and get into some really thick Boone and Crockett, like fat beam bucks. It's incredible.
really.
Yep. I'm going to connect you with a couple of social media accounts, and I want you to just kind of cruise through their pictures and their stories and hear
Yeah.
what they talk about because um, Steep and Solo, that's one of the accounts. Shout out to my boy Ryan Gaither. I'm gonna connect you with Beau because him and Shane Vandergeesen, Shane VG, who they're blacktail slayers, man, absolute slayers.
That's
So
awesome.
okay, let's talk about these mountain bucks. So whitetail deer. Normally they're ag fields, they're edge of, corn, all this stuff. And here you are chasing them in the mountains.
Yeah, so the big woods in the mountains like that to me is the way I talk growing up hunting them, so I didn't really know much else, but I always just kind of thought that they just kind of roam around the mountains and do what they want to do, and it's kind of true. But at the same time, I've come to learn like the landscapes they live in, they still have purpose in what they're doing. They still have food sources. They just might not be as defined as an ag field. But these deer are edgy. They're tough. They live in some rough conditions, and I just love getting to hunt them. The fact that like I can go 3 days without seeing a single deer while I'm sitting in the tree, but, like, still just knowing that, like, you're in a still can be in a good spot, it's just that's how low the deer density is. It's fun. I love it.
So, how do you end up hunting them? Tell us your tactic, like whitetail deer, because a lot of these Western hunters that could be listening to this podcast, they're like, oh, yeah, mule deer, mule deer, mule deer. But there's a lot of crossover in hunting, especially when you're mountain hunting. I don't care if you're whether you're sitting in a blind or tree stand or whatever, you still have to know how to find the animals, what you're looking for, do your scouting, and dial it in. So break that down a little bit for us.
Yeah, so like the first thing I'm looking at an area, I want to have vegetation diversity. So I want to have, different ages of logging cuts and maybe some big, mature oak trees and then some hemlocks or pine trees that are running the side hill and maybe some openings mixed in. But when you start having all that vegetation diversity, there's a lot of browse or a lot of food there and a lot of edges that they like to work. So I kind of learned that. And then I was like, okay, now I look at it and I cross over like the topography layer, like in the Spartan Forge app or any of the hunting apps that are out there. And once you overlay that on top of each other, then I can start seeing some like, okay, where are deer going to move? That's the easiest for them, but they still feel secure. So I'm trying to find where some of those edges are in the terrain that butts up against those vegetation edges. And it's like, boom, I'm marking a waypoint, going in there and checking it out. And I typically, once I get I mark say 15 of them on a map and I go in there and look. And I'm trying to look for big, like community type scrapes. And I spend a lot of time hunting those out of a tree saddle. So up in a tree, basically, I'm swinging around like a kid on on a swing set. But so
So,
so I'll hunt those areas. But depending on the time of the year, on where those scrapes are located.
so let me ask you this. Obviously, whitetails are rutting in what, December where you're at, or are they more November? Okay.
November, yeah.
So, when you're talking about you're going in there and looking for these scrapes, are you talking about like preseason or right before, or are you using that knowledge from the year before when you were hunting that location? Or how are you starting to identify your hunting spots like in the summer or spring or any of that?
Yeah, so the spring is my favorite time of the year to scout, and every year I do over 200 miles on my boots in the spring, just scouting areas because after the snow melts and before the leaves start to grow up and get green, you can see sign from last year, like as it happened yesterday. It's really easy to identify scrapes and all of those things. So that's like that time of year. That's what I'm focusing on. And as I get into the summer, it's more trail camera oriented or going back to the scrapes that I found in the spring and putting cameras on them and starting to learn because it's often a misconception that scrapes are only used during October and November, but if you find a good one that's like a community hub type scrape, those deer will use that licking branch year round. They might not paw the ground up, but they'll do that. So I run cameras and take that camera knowledge, then let it sit all year and learn for the next year and try to use patterns based off of, oh, this buck was moving in daylight and it was a 20-degree temperature drop on that day and what and around Halloween. So if I start seeing that same trend the following year, there's a chance that you could run into them because a lot of these deer, although they don't have clocks on their wall, they know the time and the dates very well.
Just like people can wake up in the morning at the exact same time every day, they're like, "Oh, it's that
Yep.
time, that internal clock."
Ye-
Just little. I wouldn't even call this bragging because it's not that cool. But I've only killed 3 deer in my life, and 2 of them have been whitetail, and I've only hunted Washington. So think about that right there.
Dang. No, that's awesome. Did you does Washington have a lot of ag or does it like
E-
or is it more big woods type stuff?
it has everything. Northeast is ag. Southeast is ag. Then you have the Columbia whitetail along the Columbia River, in between Oregon and Washington. Yeah, they got it all. But so I just give you a little bit of insight when you're talking about whitetail deer, and all these people in Washington or the West Coast are like, whitetail deer. What do I need to know about this? Well, they're a lot of fun to hunt, especially in the way you're talking about, because my best buck today is a 8 point, beautiful little basket buck. Not
Yep.
monstrous, but just symmetrical and really pretty. So I was spring bear hunting, and on my spring bear hunt, I'm hunting this timber cuts and this hillsides and all this, and I'm just looking in this little cut area, and I'm like, man, this looks really, I would say, bucky. It looks really bucky. It looks like there should be a bear in there. It looks like there should be some sort of animal in this little cut.
Yeah.
And so we ended up setting camp up ridge of it and on this little finger, and we were taking hikes off and scouting up the area. And one morning I wake up and I'm sipping a cup of coffee before we take off, and I'm just like browsing down. I'm just naked eye glassing down in this little cut. And all of a sudden I started seeing a deer. And all of a sudden I saw another deer. And I saw another deer. And I was like, I knew it. I knew it. Now it's springtime, so no deer had antlers at this time, right? So
Yeah.
this is the month of May. They might have had some nubs, but at this point, I was only seeing a bunch of doe. But I was like, dude, I knew that there was going to be some deer in here. So I kind of put that as a mental note in the back of my head, and we ended up running into some other animals on the trip and all this. Well, I kept that knowledge in the back of my head, and in November, we have a specific whitetail rifle season in Eastern Washington, and I was like, I know exactly where I'm going to go. We drove over there. We just got fresh snow, got like 2 feet of fresh snow, and I hiked a couple miles from the gate all the way back in there. And the minute that I got to this cut, and it's just dumping snow, like blizzard, like you can't really see, I saw the silhouette of a buck, and I was like, there it is. Before you knew it, bam, dead deer. And
Oh
it
man.
all came down because of my springtime knowledge of like, tell me about this about whitetail. If you see a deer in an area, they're more than likely always going to be in that area. Is that correct?
It depends on the time of the year and location. So, like, a lot of times, winter and summer, bucks will go could be 2, 3 miles away, but, like, depending on it depends on, again, a lot. Like, usually, once they get back into the spring and summer, they're in a spot for a period of time. The only thing that can change them is their temperament. Some of them like to go looking for does long ways away, or food sources, but if they have food, like a logging cut, this is like if there's something that's like multiple logging cuts, browse and stuff, those deer tend to stay in the same areas all year versus ones that might be having to go look for food, a couple miles away, or
Yeah.
or does. But
So that was the thing is treating it like elk hunting, right? Hunt the cows, the bulls will be there, right?
yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
And so I in the springtime I was like, there's does here. There's does here. And going in November, I knew it was the rut. I was like, if those does are still there, there's gonna be a buck. And this buck was hot. I mean, hot on this doe to the point where when I shot him and he just dropped, that doe didn't want to leave. She kind of loitered around him before she scurried off. But is that kind of your experiences? Because I know you can't see a visual of necessarily what I'm talking about, but if you go watch season 1 of Soul Seekers on Carbontv, you'll see the hunt that I'm talking about. We don't get the kill shot on camera because it was dumping snow so hard I had to put the camera away. But it's like, okay, that mountainous terrain where they're on little game trails and working their stuff.
Oh yeah.
Are you hunting corridors, travel corridors, or are you more hunting those edges or the browse feed, the where they're gonna feed at?
So I say it depends on the time of the year. Like early season, late season, I'm focused around bedding because they're not going to be up very long, in the daylight when they're coming back from wherever they're feeding. But during the rut, I focus a lot on travel corridors. So like terrain features or vegetation edges that are in between doe bedding areas that I found, say in the spring or earlier years. And I try to like set up those travel corridors that like, all right, this is the best place that they could come through and funnel through, depending on the terrain and what the vegetation looks like. So that's kind of how I set up. Earlier and later in the season, I'm focused on bedding, and as it gets closer to the rut, I'm doing more travel corridor stuff. And the pre-rut, I set up like on the outside of doe bedding areas, waiting for the bucks to cruise that downward edge, just trying to sniff them out, seeing when the first one's going to come to heat.
That's awesome. Okay, so you've gone out west and hunted mule deer how many times now?
Mule deer only once.
And how did that go for you?
uh, Not so hot. So I had spent 4 years hunting elk. On the fourth year, I killed an elk, and then I went caribou hunting in Alaska the following year. And I was like, all right, it's time for me to focus on mule deer. Like I want to kill mule deer really bad. I just love the animals and like the places they live in is incredible in the high country. And I wanted to hunt velvet archery. So last year I went to Colorado and 14-day hunt, was backpacking in and was just not feeling good at all. I mean, I was feeling really terrible. I knew I had some sort of altitude sickness, but I was like, all right, I've been up here before. I'm fine. I just kept not feeling good to the point where I couldn't figure out how to cook my own dinner. Like my brain was just gone. And
Wow.
Justin, who was filming me, was like, "Man, you just don't look good. Like, we should go down." It was like 3 days before the season, so I was like, "All right, yeah, I'll go down lower elevation, get a hotel room. I'll feel better." Well, what I didn't know at the time is you should feel better as soon as you drop to lower elevation, and I wasn't. I was still sick, and I was feeling just terrible. But 2 days later, it wasn't. I was starting to feel a little bit better, and I was like, "I'm gonna go back in. It's opening day." I go back in, and I was even worse this time. And I got to a point where my watch tells me my blood oxygen, and it was reading 71, which,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was
usually
it
you're at
was
98, 99.
yeah. So, yeah, and anywhere from 70 to 80 can cause permanent, like, brain and lung damage if you're there for a sustained period of time. So I was like, "All right, I need to get out of here and go to the hospital." So I dropped down, went to the hospital, and they had me on oxygen. First, they thought I had COVID, and all of this stuff because there's a lot of similar symptoms. And, yeah, they, diagnosed me, I guess, or whatever, with altitude sickness, and said I couldn't go above 8,000 feet anymore for the rest of that trip. Well, hunting high country mule deer, they don't live below 10,000 feet, so it's like, okay, this sucks. And I couldn't find anywhere in the unit to hunt except for one place. I did have an elk tag too, so I was like, all right, I'll focus on elk. And there wasn't an elk there since 1969. I mean, it was terrible. And there wasn't even hunters there. That's how you knew it was bad. And so, anyways, on that trip, my cousin ended up killing a really nice mule deer back in there. And as I'm sitting on the sidelines, I was Mad because I couldn't be there to help him carry it out. Like, it's my favorite thing is being there with somebody to be able to pack me out and enjoy that moment with them, and that just really hurt, not being able to do that. So my first and I ended up getting back out, last couple days. I found a spot at, like, 10,000 feet. I wasn't supposed to go there, but I was feeling better. So I hunted elk and had a really great encounter, and it made the end of the trip better, but, it was really difficult. So my whole dream, and I burned a whole bunch of points to hunt mule deer, I never really got to hunt. So that was my experience with it. And what I ended up finding out was I had some conditions and I was sick ahead of time that I didn't know that made it, like, X times worse. So that's why I've never had issues before. And I was just last weekend, I was in Colorado shooting total archery challenge, and we're above 10,000 feet, and I didn't have any problem except for shortness of breath that everybody from lower elevations gets.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so first off, I'm sorry to hear that, and that really sucks. Second
Yeah.
off, were you going to be using your whitetail tactics for the mule deer? Were you going to see how well your knowledge of the mountain bucks translates to out west?
No, and the reason why is because where we were hunting them at, it was a game of sitting behind the glass where you can't really do that in the thick country that we have on the East Coast. And high country, they're up above tree line a lot, not in that thick timber. So I didn't use any of those tactics really. I used more of just spot and stock and trying to learn from people that do it that way. I think like when I'm going to Montana this year for a rifle mule deer hunt in November. Like, I think that is something that I'd use a little more of my whitetail tactics with than I would like an early season high country hunt.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's very impressive, by the way, that you said you went out for 14 days. That's, dude,
I won't.
I think the longest
I
hunt
w-
I've ever been on is 7 days.
so I won't do a trip. I should say I won't. I won't. I don't try to plan a trip less than 2 weeks anymore, because what I've learned is it's not like I'm backpacked in for 14 days straight or anything, like, but that gives me the ability to hunt hard for like 4 days, take a day off, hunt hard and, like, not feel rushed and just, like, fully understand the landscape, fully understand the elk or whatever you're hunting, and, like, just be immersed in it and not feel rushed all the time. And that's when I would have like 7 days and you had travel on the front end and all that stuff. Like, I just felt crammed, and I felt like I didn't enjoy the experience of being out there as much because I was so, like, focused on the end result and knowing that I only had X amount of days left. When I give myself 2 weeks, it allows me to relax a little bit and just work at it over a period of time.
Yeah. Ryan Lampers, a stealthy hunter himself, I asked him on a podcast one time because he kills monster animals just all the
Yeah.
time, just monsters. And I go, Ryan, how much time do you give yourself for a hunt? And he giggled because I'm a weekend warrior. Being a school teacher in the past, like, I might be able to take off a Friday or maybe be able to take off a Monday, because there's just too much to deal with. So it was always leave as soon as you're off work on Thursday. You're driving to the trailhead. You're on like 3 hours of sleep. You're waking up
Yep.
early. You're hiking in. You got a couple days, and then you're just beat. And by the time Sunday night rolls around and you're rolling in at dark and you got to wake up early for work the next morning, it's just kicking your butt. So I asked him, I was like, how many days do you give yourself for a hunt? He goes, well, because have you ever had Ryan on the podcast?
No, I haven't. I've
Awesome.
met him before, but I haven't had him on the podcast yet.
Awesome dude. Kind of, chuckles, laid back. Well, Johnny, I won't go on a hunt if it's less than 7 days, but usually about a minimum of 10 days is what I give myself on a hunt. And I'm like, there it is, hands up in the air. I dropped my pen. I was like, of course, no wonder you're smoking
Yep.
monster animals, because you have time. You have time to learn your area, time to learn the animals, get to familiar with what's in the area, rather than a weekend warrior like me. It's like, there's a legal animal, shoot it. you know?
Yeah. No, that's so true. There's no shortcut to that. It's like time. I mean, this and it's like I have not interviewed Ryan, but anybody else that I've talked to, like, the guys that are consistently successful, are putting a lot of time into it. They're able to, take off from work or whatever and dedicate that time, and they go into the last possible minute. They're not done on day 7 of 10 because they're just like, "Oh, there's no deer," and they just keep going and they keep working at it, and that's what I've found too
Yeah.
from talking to a bunch of people.
Now, from what I've gathered about you, my knowledge of you is that you are a student. You like to study, you like to learn, and you read books. So, one of the books that I'm going to throw out there and ask you is like, have you ever read any Malcolm Gladwell books? And you ever heard about his
Yeah,
10,000 hour rule?
no, but I have. I don't know which book I read of his, but I definitely read a book of
Like
his.
Freakonomics or something like that?
No, it wasn't even. Oh man, that's gonna drive me nuts. But yeah, keep going. What
So,
about that
so
one?
Malcolm Gladwell says that in order to reach mastery of a subject, you have to put in 10,000 hours. When you hit 10,000 hours of a subject, you reach mastery, meaning, you know, you've reached the end, and then depending on just how good you are, or how skillful you are, uh, will take you from there. And so, when it comes to these newer hunters or anyone trying things for the very first time or whatever it is, like if you're not having success, yeah, of course you're not having success because you're so new at it. And it doesn't
Yeah,
matter if you've been hunting for 15 years, if you've only been hunting 6 days a year for the last 15 years. You're not going to get that good at it versus the dudes who are out in the field, you know, 35 days a year and, putting in time because it doesn't matter what you're hunting. It's cross training. I guess the term cross training is lost in society nowadays because everyone's so specialized. But back in the
yeah,
day,
yeah,
it's like, dude, I got my cross trainers. I can shoot hoops, lift weights, and run in these. Like,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, I'm a bear hunter, a deer hunter, an elk hunter, an upland game hunter. I'm, like predator hunter, whatever. So that's kind of the concept in which I truly believe, and it really hit me. So last year I didn't shoot very many animals because I had a lot of opportunities where I had other people with me take shot opportunities. But the year before, I notched 4 big game tags. I shot 2 black bear, an elk, and a deer. I was like, dude, that's money. That's
yeah,
fire. Like that was a goal that I was able to cross off my manifest list and be like, okay, let's move on from there. And then I started to think and I reflected because I believe that inward reflection leads to outward correction. And I thought about this for a second. I was like, okay. And I started to count up how many days was I afield, not necessarily hunting, but like whether it's scouting, learning new area, or specifically hunting. Like how much time did I go in my boots out? And I was like up in the 50s for the calendar year. And I was like, there you go. Like
yep,
I'm putting in the work and I'm getting rewarded because of that.
yeah, and that's another good point you brought up. It's like, when I look at whitetails, like up until this point now, I'll have more time, but like I had maybe a week I could get off of work, and then just Saturdays because they don't allow hunting on Sundays in Pennsylvania. So it was like this deal where I was like, okay, I just put in so much time in the off season. I was scouting 98% of that time and you know, only actually hunting 2% of the time, really, to be able to do that. And I think that's a really good point, like you talking about your season last year of, you put in that work ahead of time. And so when you had your weekend off that you could go, that you were able to capitalize.
Yeah,
And the Malcolm Gladwell book was the tipping point. That's the one I read.
there you go.
Yeah.
Interesting concepts that he throws out there.
Yeah, he is an interesting guy, that's for sure.
No doubt. All right, so let's talk about your Western hunt when it came to your very first big game elk. Your elk, your monster. Was that Montana? State of Montana?
That was Idaho.
Idaho. Dude, just take me through it. I followed and listened to your podcast that you recorded from camp the year before when you were in Colorado.
Yeah,
Your
yeah, yeah.
tailgate episodes. And so to see you always constantly being like, okay, I'm going out west, I'm gonna kill a big game animal, I'm going out west, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, and then you finally sealing the deal on that elk. I was like, yeah, let's go, Beau. Dude, take us through tell the listeners all about that hunt. and the preparation and, wherever it
Yeah.
starts.
So like the quick backstory was for 3 years I was going out there. The beginning 7 days, and that turned to a 10-day trip. Then it was a 14-day trip, and I didn't kill an elk. I mean, I was trying so hard and just screwing up. I mean, I was having opportunities, and I felt like I just like if I get more at bats, like eventually I'm gonna hit one of these. I'm gonna hit the balls, so to speak, and that year going into Idaho, I was just like I had hunted Colorado up to that point, and I don't even really think the location's that important. More than so, it was just like a reset for me of like, all right, I'm sick of not killing an elk. I'm gonna do everything I possibly can, and like I had set up like time, and I've carried this through, since then. But like 10 minutes a day to e-scout, like something very manageable, break it into small pieces, something that I can do. I'm going to be in the best shape that I can because that's always a limiting factor for, me getting tired and you start getting like, I don't, there's probably not any elk over there anyway. So I was like, I'm going to be the best physical shape I can be in. I'm going to learn to call elk and I'm going to shoot my bow every day. And I just was like laser focused on that one goal. That's what I was focused on. And then through e-scouting, I found a spot on a map and I joked around about it because this is just the way I am with my buddies. But I sent it to him and I named the waypoint 100% chance of bull down, and like and I was just like just being cocky and just like joking around with my buddies. And didn't it happen that first day in there, I kill a bull 60 yards from that waypoint.
Dude.
No joke, which is complete luck. But I'll go back just a little bit to that part of the story. But it was like I just learned so much, and it was a lot of luck that that bull was at that spot. But it was an area that had everything. There was a saddle up above that went down to some green feeding areas, and as it dipped down into this little bowl, you could see a pond that looked like they might wallow in it, and then kind of a little bit of a meadow, and then some real nice north-facing slopes that I'm like, oh, look, could be good bedding. Maybe this is like an area before they go back to bed that they come through. And yeah, going in there, and I went in there actually the night before, right after we got in, and I heard a bugle from one of those areas that I presumed was bedding. And so that next morning, got up really early. It was the first time I ever had a hunt filmed, like, for myself, and first day meeting my camera guy, who was still my camera guy and, like, one of my great friends, Justin, and Justin was like I'm like, "Hey, we're gonna get up at, like, whatever time it was, 3:30 in the morning and hike 2,500 feet up, elevation gain up this mountain and get ready to be at that meadow before first light." And he just went up and trucked his way up there, and, like, and I looked at my mindset for that hunt was like, hunt like every day is your last day. Like just go after it, get after it. And we got up there, and right at first light, this giant bull, bigger than the one I shot, came across that meadow, but he was just too far out of range and went and bedded in that spot. So we sat there and waited. We moved to the other side of the meadow so we could shoot if another elk came through there. And then just sat there waiting for the thermals to kind of switch and chill out so we could go in and try to get him up out of his bed. And next thing I know, I see that saddle up on the in the corner. I just see elk starting to dump into it, coming towards me, and I'm like, "Holy cow!" I'm like, "This is gonna happen." And here comes cow out, spike, and then a 5x5, and they come out, and I'm ranging the cows. I'm like 60 yards, perfect. Like this is where off my back porch that I was shooting. I'd literally just step out after work. If I was going to shoot two arrows, it was 60 yards. That's where the end of the patio was. And I'm like, this is perfect. And the cows get just in front of me, and the wind switches, and I feel it hit the back of my neck. They whirl, they take off. I'm like, oh no, like there was my chance. It's gone. I don't know what happened, but a minute later, they came right back out. Some more cows came down, came out in that opening. The bulls followed again, hit that spot. This time the wind stayed good. And I kept ranging the spike, and Justin's like, I thought you were going to shoot that spike. And I said, I was. He's like, but there was a 5x5 behind it. I said, I've been elk hunting for 4 years. Like, yeah, I'm not letting an opportunity go. And I eventually was like, okay, this 5x5's coming right behind it. I'm going to wait. And I shot him, and he ran like 60 yards and just piled up right there. And like I have never felt that kind of emotion from a hunt my entire life. Like just I lost it. Like I was just a mess because it was like something I worked so hard for and put so much time and effort and thought and money and time. And it was just like it all happened right there. And I just couldn't even believe it. Like the perfect and it was so cool though that like first time having a camera guy, Justin's over my shoulder, gets the shot in slow mo, hitting him going out and falling over, like all that to be captured and watch it back. It was it was really cool. Like I couldn't wait to text on my inReach to my buddies that were hunting the same area, and then my dad, and like just tell everybody like, finally did it after
Dude,
40 some days of elk hunting.
dude, that is so freaking awesome. Did you take a 60-yard shot?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so I want to speak to this for a second because
Yeah,
you said, and it's really funny to hear how people talk. I'm a huge proponent in self-talk, right? Like Master Yoda,
yeah,
there is no try, there is only do or do not. And the concept is like we speak into existence what our reality is, right? If you're always
yeah.
like, "Oh, I'm stupid, I'm stupid, I'm stupid," you're gonna think you're stupid. The self affirmations, that positive self talk. So when you labeled that Onyx point or Waypoint or whatever mapping software you're using at the time, and you're like 100% bull down in your head, I'm sure if I could speak for you, I'm sure you're like you in your heart of hearts knew that you were going to kill a bull there. But when you tell other people, you don't want it to sound like so arrogant where you're like, ha ha ha, I was kind of joking. Like,
Yeah.
did you really know you were gonna shoot a bull there?
I I'm a big believer in that and the positive thinking and mindset. And like I visualize things happening ahead of time. And
Yes.
that was pretty dang close to like it just had like I was like so hyper focused on that area. I had to really like as I was building my hunt plan, look at other areas and make sure I had backup plans. But I was like so set on that one spot. And I haven't found a spot like that since, but, like, it was just I was so hyper focused on it, and I look at that, like, when I'm deer hunting too, and if I'm hunting a specific whitetail, I'm like, really the odds of me seeing him in these thousands of acres of timber where you can see 30 yards is very slim, but, like, there's certain scenarios when I feel like my preparation is dialed, he likes to use this wind, there's a temperature drop. I feel really good about my stand setup, like that I'm confident going in. When I shot my buck last year, the opening day of the whitetail season in the big woods, it was like told everybody at camp that night before, same thing. I was like, I think I can kill this buck tomorrow. And they're like, why? You haven't killed an opening day buck ever. Like, why? And I'm just like, I was from that preparation and everything else, it just like I had that confidence in my head and I kept seeing it. I kept seeing it over and over again. I hiked in there that morning and I was just like, this is happening.
Yes.
And and then like the first hour and a half, there was nothing. It was dead. And I'm like, well, maybe I don't have this. But there he came. So
Dude, okay, so the year that I'm gonna call it a grand slam with my tags, I
yeah.
had multiple opportunities like that where I really envisioned it. I closed my eyes, I saw how scenarios played out, and they truly played out exactly like that. Spring bear hunt started off with I knew that I was going to shoot a color phase bear, and wind was going to be coming uphill, and I was going to be able to stalk downhill on it, and I was going to arrow it. I wanted to arrow a black bear. Turns out that my buddy, hunting partner, two shot, he missed a bear right beforehand. And so I didn't want to let a bear get away. So I ended up shooting it with a rifle. So if you watch the film, I actually have an archery release around my wrist when I shoot the bear with the gun. Um, but it would have played out exactly how it came out. It was the color I expected, all this. The whitetail buck that I shot that year. When I saw the deer in the cut, and it's like, oh, there's gonna be a buck here. I'm gonna come back in November and shoot one. Sure enough, there was. When I went to my archery shop, I talked to my guy, and I was like, hey, I shoot a 5-pin, by the way. What do you shoot?
I shoot a double pin.
Okay. So hunting big woods, big timber, but then also elk and different stuff. I'm like, hey, what do you recommend? He's like, well, if you're hunting deer, I recommend a 20 through 60 setup. But if you're hunting elk, I recommend a 30 through 70 setup. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Kill zone's a lot bigger, so anywhere under 30, you're using that 30 pin, or if you're really close, use that 40 pin and you're dialed in.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay. So I started shooting at 70 yards, kind of like you, where it's like, dude, I shoot at 60 yards because that's my max distance shooting. And that's my, like I feel good. And if I feel good at 60, I'm going to feel great at 50 and even better at 40 and even,
Yep.
and just work your way back in. And so I'd go and I shoot 70 all the time, all the time. So on my elk hunt, I'm I didn't call them. It was more of a spot and stock style. And we're hunting these like feeding fields mixed in with timber. And I'm like, dude, if I see an elk on the far edge of this field, how far is that going to be? Like a couple hundred yards. And so there's one lone tree, and I was like, I bet you that is 70 yards. And so I pulled out my rangefinder, I range it. Just sure enough, happens to be 70 yards. About 15 minutes later, we stumble on elk, and I end up having to go full draw before I even step out. Because they were just kind of
Yeah.
feeding around, and the wind, I didn't want to lose them. It was last light, so I go full draw. I step out behind bushes. I never range, but I after practicing it and seeing it and envisioning it, I held my 70 pin on my elk and sent it and smoked it. And I was like, there you go. And a lot of it is that power of self talk, and the world gets beat down for cockiness so much that they confuse confidence for cockiness.
Mhm. No, and no, I also think, like, one of the things I did that year, and now I'm thinking about elk hunting again this year. I'm gonna have to get it back out, but I have one of those, like, solo targets I bought. They're like cardboard, just like chintzy things that, but it's looks like it's the size of an elk. It looks like it, and you just pin it onto your regular target. You put the target behind the vitals, and I just looked at that elk and the size and all that stuff, like, and you start, I believe that you start getting that in your mind, and you just start going with it. My one buddy, um, Johnny, that is from PA, really good whitetail hunter, and I was like, and I will be talking at camp, and I'll say things like, "Oh yeah, good luck," and he'll be like, "Oh no, you don't believe in luck. Like, you've put in the work. You know, either you're gonna put yourself in that situation or not." He's like, "You got to believe it. You got to have that confidence." And it's not easy to have confidence until you do it. Like, to practice and get through those things. But if you put in that work, I feel like, and you have that confidence, it's a really deadly combination.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I moved to the state of Texas this year, and I drew a monster bull tag for the state of Washington. Uh, an archery. So like final year of resident tags. I bought all my licenses before I left, and before I claimed residency anywhere else. And I'm like, this year I'm drawing a moose tag. I was like, I don't know what it is. I know I'm drawing a moose tag. Well, I didn't draw a moose tag, but I drew a trophy bull archery unit.
No way.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay, this really screws up my plans because I was going to go hunt cows and spikes in Utah, and now I have to fly back to my home state of Washington and smash a monster. But when it comes to here it is like you are the East meets West. I'm like the West meets East meets going back to the West. So here I am. I actually have to virtual scout my home state that I'm never going to be able to scout
Yeah.
in person and on foot. So, what are some key like takeaways or ahas or whatever you could share that has helped you when it came to digitally scouting for an area you've never been to?
Yeah, so I will preface this and say that, like, I'm not a great elk hunter by any means, but I have spent a lot of time looking at the computers and trying to learn it. You know what I mean? So, like, take all this with a grain of salt. But the way I look at it is, or what I've found is, I was trying to find areas that, so like this area specifically, without giving too much detail, is like edge of a unit boundary. it didn't have enough that you could go real backcountry and backpack hunt because it got to really steep stuff and you just couldn't go any further or you'd be in the other unit. And but it was, a little bit far enough off the road that would kind of keep the people that hunt close to roads away. And in that spot, that like say for example, that elk that I killed in that spot had everything. It had food. It had a little bit of like a meadow there and everything, and food down on the other side. It had bedding off the north side of the slope there. And it was kind of a mix of open country and dark timber, so it was more prevalent. And it had some water there. I'm like, everything is here, and that seems good. But so like I look at the pressure spots and trying to find those areas where people aren't going to be is kind of the first thing I do, and then look at the typical elk finding features of like where they're going to eat, where they're going to sleep, and where they're going to get water at, and try to look at how they're using the terrain to do so, which they do use the terrain a lot like whitetails do. And in the mountains, for like as far as how they're going to move, they're going to use the path of least resistance, it sounds, but they're going to try to go up these draws up one side or the other, or move across benches instead of the straight side hills, and stay off the tops. And those are the types of things that I've learned, kind of with whitetails and elk, and kind of combine them together.
I love it. Is is buying out of state tag from somebody who is like, all right, I'm going out west. How intimidating is it to be like, okay, I'm going to commit this amount of money, this amount of time? Do you have to go into it with a headset like you're in it more for the adventure rather than you're in it for killing the animal? And then the counter to that is, does that screw with your confidence of like you envisioning, you knowing what's going to happen?
So okay, I'll answer this two ways, kind of. So like when I look at it, most if it's the first year hunting an animal, I typically don't go in with like a lot of confidence or like seeing it happening. Like for the most part, I use it as like this is going to be a learning experience, a new place, adventure, and I'm going to use this stuff, and I'm going to come back, better. And again, I'm not saying I'm writing off that first year, but that's kind of a realistic expectation with that the first time I do something. And at the same time, what was the second part of that? I'm losing
So
my
yeah,
repeat the question if
yeah.
you would.
So you're putting in all this time and effort and this money and all this stuff to take this grand adventure. Are you treating it
Yeah.
more like an adventure versus the confidence of like, no, I'm envisioning this, going to manifest this, and I know what I'm going to go get?
I will say that depends a little bit on, again, if I've hunted them before. If I've hunted them before, then I go in with the idea that I'm gonna kill whatever I'm there for, and I go into it that way. But if it is my first year, there's gonna be a learning curve for it, even no matter how much e-scouting I do and watching videos and listen to podcasts and all those things. Like I typically with a new species don't feel as confident. Now, if it's like whitetail in another state, that's a different thing. But if it's a whole different animal like bear this year in Montana, I ended up getting one, but I can't say that I completely envisioned that one. It was more of I have no idea what bears do other than everyone says they eat grass around the snow line. So that's all I know.
They do bear stuff.
And
That's what we,
they do bear
they
they
do
do
bear
bear
stuff.
stuff. So like but I guess that's how I look at it. It really depends on my past experience with it and how I feel going into it. But a lot of this, as we talked about with like the hunting industry stuff, takes time. And even now with me with whitetails, when I go to a new area, it's a 3-year plan for me. That doesn't mean I don't expect to possibly kill on year one, but I know it's going to take me 3 full years to completely understand that area and understand how deer move through it, how they bet on it, and timings of things. It's going to take me a little bit to fully grasp it.
Dude, I've never heard someone say something like that before. 3-year plan. I
Yeah.
like that.
Oh yeah. That's I look at everything from a 3-year strategy. And like I won't go down too much of a rabbit hole in this, but like with whitetails, it'll be like, all right, I'm looking at this big map area. I'm gonna, e-scout. I'm gonna find these focus points, and I'm just gonna speed scout that in like a weekend or a day, and just hit these good points. I'm gonna drop cameras there and kind of spread them out different places, and then The second year as I go in, maybe I didn't even hunt it that year, but I now have camera data and I'm seeing sign again laid down. And I'm like, all right, now I'm going to start clustering my cameras a little bit, in the better areas, or I might try to hunt it this year. And then as you go into that third year, you're really starting to know, okay, this area is hot and around Halloween. The last 2 years is scrape lit up. This is a really good spot. All right, over here, there's this food sources. It's had acorns the last 2 years. So if it doesn't this year, it might change it. But if it does, I know what to focus on, based off of that. For me, it just takes that knowledge of scouting and hunting the area, learning the winds, learning how the thermals work to really feel extremely confident going into it. But yeah.
So there you go. Malcolm Gladwell calls it the 10,000 hour rule. Beau Martonik from East Meets West calls it the 3-year plan. I love it. I love it. Dude, you're so savage, bro. By the way, I've truly enjoyed this conversation. This has been a great podcast and really one for the books. Thank you so much, Beau, for joining me, brother.
No, thank you. I'm glad we got the talk here, and yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, dude, I love it. My pleasure. So, a question that I also used to ask all my guests back in the early days of the podcast is, what has hunting done for you?
Oh, that's a tough question. I have three different ways I'm kind of thinking about it right off the top of my head, but I will say that hunting has hunting has diversified me in the fact that like I've got to see so many other places that it's like given me different outlooks on it. I'm able to see different cultures. I've been to some villages in Alaska. I've been to all these things. So hunting is not only like from the fulfillment of the adventure side of it and just like the singular focus on it, but it's helped me be able to see things that otherwise wouldn't have. That I feel like has made me a little bit more of a well-rounded person, being someone that comes from a small town and just is, usually kind of stuck in this one location. So hunting has really opened that up for me.
So awesome. I love it. Well, it's evident by who you are, how you hold yourself, and what you do that um, hunting is good for you, but you're also good for hunting, Beau. And I want to acknowledge you for that, brother, because there's a lot of times in this world where it's like, man, I really like doing this. Yeah, but does that thing really need you to be doing it? Where
No, thank you. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, brother, good luck on all your adventures this coming year. Where can people follow along with you at? Obviously, social media, but are you putting out YouTube or anything like that?
Yeah, so mostly everything's at eastmeetswesthunt.com. I have a YouTube channel. It's just under my personal name, Beau Martonik. I tried changing it to East Meets West, but they have like some weird thing when you set up a Google account. But nonetheless, you can find me there. East Meets West Hunt podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. The video version goes on YouTube along with some scouting videos and some hunt films from some of these adventures. So yeah, and then just the normal social media places, Instagram, Facebook, either Beau Martonic or East Meets West, you'll find me there. So
Love it.
that's what I'll say.
You're savage. You're savage. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. This has been just a wonderful episode with Beau. Remember that hunting has the power to transform lives through primal adventure. You cannot outgive good, and mentorship is conservation, everybody. Be blessed. Thank you for tuning in on this episode. If you liked it, like, share, and subscribe. Go follow along with Beau on his journeys and his podcast. I heard there was a pretty good one. It might be in the early 70s or something like that of he had this guest on by the name of Johnny Mac. I don't know, whatever.
It might have disappeared. I don't know.
Oh, ouch. Anyways, guys, be blessed. Thank you for tuning in. Freedom on. And as always, stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Johnny Mac here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are looking for a community that is open to discussion as far as mentorship, conservation, the wild, becoming a better person, and all of that, there is a group for you on Facebook, and it is called Soul Seekers. Soul Seekers, we are all about making ourselves a better person. We're all about making sure hunting lasts for generations to come and encouraging people to get plugged in. Whether you are someone who has something to give or someone who needs to soak it up like a sponge, this is a community for you, and I strongly encourage you that if you're on Facebook to join Soul Seekers, and if you're not on Facebook, hop on there just for that group. It is only going to be as powerful as we all make it. And so just remember that life happens for you, it doesn't happen to you, and that you can't outgive good. You can't outgive good, people. I want you to understand that, and I want you to believe it, because when we believe that and we lead with courage and we lead with intention, lives are changed. Lives are transformed, just like on this podcast, transformation through primal adventure. Be blessed. Enjoy this episode. Talk soon.